My dear wonderful friends. Tonight, I shall share with you something so simple and yet so powerful that if you truly accept it, your whole world must begin to change. Not because you persuade the world, not because you force circumstances, not because you struggle for signs, but because you will have touched the only creative power there is. For I tell you plainly, your inner conversation is not idle. It is not harmless. It is not just thoughts. It is the secret speech of consciousness, and consciousness is the one and only reality. Many come to me and say, Neville, how long must I wait? How many nights must I imagine? How many times must I repeat the words? And I answer them gently but firmly. You do not wait upon time. Time waits upon you. If you will learn to speak to yourself correctly, deliberately, faithfully, for 3 days, you will see the beginning of a transformation, so natural, so inevitable, that you will wonder how you ever lived any other way. Not 3 months, not 3 years, not a lifetime of hoping. 3 days. Now, when I say talk to yourself, I am not speaking of the muttering chatter that runs through the mind of the average man and woman. I am speaking of that inner conversation that takes place when no one is listening, and yet everything is listening. That conversation you have with yourself in the quiet moments, while you dress, while you walk, while you lie awake at night, those silent sentences are not passing thoughts. They are seeds, and every seed bears after its kind. If you speak inwardly, as one who is defeated, you will live in a world that confirms defeat. If you speak inwardly, as one who is neglected, you will meet neglect in 1,000 forms. If you speak inwardly, as one who is unloved, you will find evidence of that assumption everywhere you look. Not because the world is cruel, no, but because the world is faithful. It is faithful to your state, faithful to your inner word, faithful to the conversation you carry in secret. Scripture tells us, in the beginning was the Word. It does not mean the word of some distant deity, thundering from the sky. It means the inner word, your quiet conversation, your assumptions spoken inwardly with feeling. For let me say it in a way you cannot misunderstand. Your inner conversation is your consciousness externalized. Again, your inner conversation is your consciousness externalized. And what you call life is simply the echo of what you have been saying within. Now, because men do not understand this, they spend their days trying to alter effects. They wrestle with circumstances. They plead with people. They strain and struggle and exhaust themselves, only to return again and again to the same old results. Yet all the while, they are speaking inwardly the very sentences that reproduce those results. They say, I never get ahead. They say, it's always hard for me. They say, money doesn't stay with me. They say, I'm not the one who gets chosen. They say, things never work out. And life, being the perfect mirror of consciousness, says, very well, as you have spoken within, so shall it be shown without. So tonight, I want to take you by the hand, quietly, gently, and show you a different way to speak. Not like a beggar pleading for change, but like one who has discovered a law and is finally willing to use it. And yes, I will use a symbol that will startle some of you. I will speak of the lottery, not as a game of chance, not as superstition, not as something you chase with desperate hands, but as a dramatic illustration of this truth. There is no chance. There is only consciousness. The figure is not important. Whether it be $1 or 100 million, the principle does not change. The sum is only a symbol, an extreme symbol, so that you may see, clearly and unmistakably, that the power is not in conditions, nor in odds, nor in luck, but in the state from which you speak. And I tell you, if a man truly changes the way he talks to himself, if he becomes faithful to a new inner conversation for 3 days, he will witness a rearrangement of his world that cannot be explained by the old causes he once believed in. Now I must give you a warning, quietly, but truly. This is not for the curious mind that only wishes to be entertained. This is not for the one who says, how interesting, and then returns to the same inner complaints. This is not for the one who listens the way a man listens to a story and then forgets it by morning. This is for the one who is willing to change identity, because the real secret is not a phrase. The real secret is not a charm. The real secret is not some outer ritual. The secret is that you are always, in every moment, assuming yourself to be someone, and your inner conversation is the voice of that assumption. So if you desire a different life, you must become a different man, a different woman, not in appearance, not in strain, but in consciousness. And the first sign that you have changed consciousness is this: you speak to yourself differently. You stop speaking as the one who is waiting. You stop speaking as the one who is struggling. You stop speaking as the one who is unlucky, overlooked, burdened, and bound. And you begin, quietly, steadily, to speak as the one who has received. My dear friends, I am not asking you to believe me. I am asking you to test it. For the law is never proved by argument, it is proved only by experience. Give me 3 days. 3 days of disciplined inner speech. 3 days of loyal inner conversation from the end, and you will see the beginning of evidence. You will see doors open where there were walls. You will see people shift without your persuasion. You will see events arrange themselves with such naturalness that later you will say it could not have happened any other way. And yet, you will know the truth. You will know it began in the silence, in the secret place, in the quiet conversation you had with yourself, when no one was there to applaud you, and no one was there to stop you. So now, if you will remain with me, I will show you exactly how to conduct this inner conversation, not as one repeating words like a parrot, but as one entering a state. I will show you how to speak from the end, how to revise the moment you stray, and how to carry this new inner speech through the day and into the night, until it takes root and hardens into fact. For those of you who are listening now, I must make something very clear before we go any further, so that you do not mistake what is being shared tonight for superstition, fantasy, or idle dreaming. I am not speaking to you as a theorist. I am not speaking to you as a philosopher, speculating from a distance. I am speaking to you as one who has lived this law, tested it, taught it, and watched it operate with unfailing precision in the lives of countless men and women over many years. I have stood before audiences night after night, long before such things were fashionable or popular. There were no screens flashing promises, no slogans shouted for attention, only men and women sitting quietly, hungry for understanding, asking the same question again and again. Neville, how long? How long must I imagine? How long must I persist? How long before something changes? And I would look at them and smile, because they were asking the wrong question. They were still thinking in terms of time acting upon them, rather than consciousness acting upon time. So I began to tell them something that startled many and liberated a few. I said, if you will change the way you speak to yourself, and remain faithful to that change for 3 days, you will set in motion forces that cannot be stopped. Not because I wished it so, not because I hoped it so, but because it is law. Now the number 3 did not arise from superstition, nor did I choose it for effect. I did not pluck it from the air. I discovered it through scripture, through experience, and through observation of the structure of consciousness itself. Scripture is not history. Scripture is psychology written in symbolic language. When you read of Jonah in the belly of the whale for 3 days, you are not reading about a man swallowed by a fish. You are reading about a state of consciousness, a gestation period where the old state dies and a new state is born. When you read of Christ entering the tomb and rising on the 3rd day, you are not reading about an external savior performing miracles for admiration. You are reading the eternal story of every assumption that is accepted, incubated, and then externalized. 3 days represents completion. It represents fulfillment. It represents the full acceptance of an assumption. Psychologically, it is the time required for a new state to take root when it is not contradicted. And here is where most fail. Quietly, unknowingly, without ever realizing why nothing changes. They speak well for a moment. They hear a talk. They feel inspired. They say the right words for an hour, perhaps a day. And then, without noticing, they return to the old inner dialogue. They wake in the morning and speak as the old self. They walk through the day, reacting as the old self. They fall asleep rehearsing the same old conversations of fear, doubt, lack, and limitation. And then they say, it didn't work. But my dear friends, the law never failed. They simply never stayed faithful long enough to let it work. This teaching is not magic. It is not chance. It is not luck dressed in spiritual language. It is structure. Just as the body has structure, consciousness has structure. Just as a seed has a gestation period, an assumption has a gestation period. Just as night follows day, the outer world follows the inner word. I have watched this happen too many times to doubt it. I have seen men who spoke inwardly as failures for decades and lived that failure faithfully. I have seen women who spoke inwardly as unwanted and met rejection everywhere they turned. And then quietly, deliberately, they changed the conversation. Not loudly, not theatrically, but consistently. And within days, sometimes 3, sometimes a little longer depending on resistance, their world began to rearrange itself as though guided by invisible hands. People changed, circumstances softened, opportunities appeared where none existed before. And yet, to the untrained eye, it looked like coincidence. But I knew better. And now, you are being invited to know better. So let me say this clearly, so there is no misunderstanding. The reason most people fail is not because they speak wrongly. It is because they speak rightly for a moment, and then return to the old dialogue the rest of the day. They plant a seed, and then dig it up every few hours to see if it is growing. They speak as the fulfilled one, and then argue inwardly with appearances. They affirm abundance, and then complain inwardly about lack. They imagine victory, and then whisper defeat to themselves when no one is listening. And consciousness, being impartial, says only this: which one shall I express? You see, consciousness does not average your thoughts. It does not negotiate with your intentions. It externalizes your dominant inner conversation. This is why I emphasize 3 days, not as a ritual, not as a superstition, but as a period of unbroken loyalty to a new state. 3 days where you refuse, gently but firmly, to return to the old self. 3 days where you speak only from the end. 3 days where you do not argue with appearances. 3 days where you let the old man die, for something must die before something new can live. And that something is not the world, it is your former concept of yourself. Now, if you will stay with me, I will show you step by step, not as a list, but as a living experience, how to identify who is speaking inside you, from what state they are speaking, and how to move that voice from the old identity into the new. Because when the speaker changes, the world must follow. Now let us go deeper. Because if you misunderstand what I mean by talking to yourself, you will take this teaching and turn it into nothing more than another passing comfort, something you listen to, agree with, and then forget the moment life presses upon you. When I speak of self-talk, I am not referring to the surface noise of the mind. Most people confuse the two. They believe that because thoughts pass through them all day, little fragments, little worries, little images, they are thinking. And they are, of course. But that is not the thing that shapes destiny. Those are often like birds passing across the sky. They come and they go. They are not always chosen. They are not always believed. They are not always felt. But beneath that surface chatter is something far more powerful. Beneath it is the conversation that you return to again and again. The sentence that feels like you. The quiet agreement you carry about yourself, about life, about what is possible, about what never happens for someone like me. That is not a passing thought. That is a state speaking. And that, my dear friends, is what I mean when I say you are talking to yourself. You are always talking to yourself. Quietly, inwardly, continually. whether you realize it or not. The only question is this: from which state are you speaking? Hear that again, and let it go deep, because it is one of the most revealing statements you will ever hear. You are always talking to yourself. The question is, from which state? Now, I have watched people all my life, and I have listened, not only to what they say with their mouths, but to what they must be saying within, because the outer life never lies. The outer life is the witness. It is the faithful testimony of the inner word. A person may smile and speak kindly in public, and yet within be conducting conversations of bitterness and defeat. A person may appear confident to the world, and yet within be whispering, "I am not enough. I am not chosen. I am always behind." And the world, in time, must echo the hidden voice, not the public performance. This is why I call the inner conversation the true prayer. Most people think prayer is something done in a church, on a certain day, in a certain posture, with certain words. But prayer is not bound by place or ritual. Prayer is the inward movement of consciousness. Prayer is the secret speech of the heart. And you are praying all day long by the sentences you accept as true about yourself. Now let me separate two things for you, very gently, so you can see yourself clearly without condemnation. There is the automatic thought, and there is the deliberate inner conversation. An automatic thought may flash through the mind. What if something goes wrong? It may appear like a spark, and you may dismiss it, and it is gone. But the deliberate inner conversation is what you continue. It is what you entertain. It is what you rehearse. You can tell the difference by this one sign. The deliberate inner conversation always carries feeling. It always has a tone. It is not merely words, it is identity speaking. It is the difference between a man who briefly thinks, "Perhaps I'm not good enough," and a man who lives in the quiet conviction, "I'm never good enough," and therefore always behaves, chooses, and reacts as one who is never enough. The first is a passing shadow. The second is a dwelling place. And you do not change your life by chasing shadows. You change your life by changing where you live in consciousness. Now consider this, because it will explain far more than you might imagine. Every relationship you have, every friendship, every marriage, every difficulty, every tenderness began as a conversation in you. Before you ever heard the words from another person's mouth, you heard something within. You expected something. You assumed something. You carried an atmosphere about yourself in relation to that person. A woman may say she wants love, and yet inwardly she carries the conversation. Men always leave. I am always second. I am never truly chosen. And then she meets the world exactly as she has spoken it. A man may say he wants respect, and yet inwardly he rehearses. No one values me. I must fight to be seen. I must prove myself. And so the world gives him endless opportunities to prove, and never the ease of being valued. The world is not punishing you. It is reflecting you. And every failure you have ever known, every disappointment that seems to repeat, was first a phrase spoken silently. Not always spoken with the lips, no, but spoken with the feeling of acceptance. A silent sentence, repeated until it felt natural, until it became truth to you. I always struggle. Nothing works for me. I never get the break. Money never stays. I'm too old now. It's too late. It's not for me. My dear friends, these are not innocent words. These are not harmless complaints. These are creative acts. They are assumptions in verbal form. And the strangest part is that the one speaking them does not even know he is prophesying. Let me give you a simple example, one you may recognize, because it is the story of countless men, and in different form, countless women also. There was a man, let us call him Thomas, who lived in what the world would call modest means. He worked, he tried, he made his effort, and yet he never seemed to rise. Life always felt tight, always pressing, always just beyond reach. Now if you asked Thomas in the daytime, he would have told you he wanted wealth. He would have said, "Of course I want to be free. Of course I want to be free. Of course I want abundance. Who wouldn't?" He would have spoken of plans, of hopes, of wishes. But if you could have listened to Thomas at night, when no one was there to hear him, you would have discovered the real cause of his life. You would have heard him say inwardly as he undressed, "It's always the same." You would have heard him say, "I never get ahead." You would have heard him sigh, "Something always happens." You would have heard him rehearse the conversation of the day, the bill, the employer, the cost of living, and he would have felt the heaviness of it as he spoke. Now Thomas would not have called this prayer. He would not have called it creation. He would have called it being realistic. But the subconscious does not understand the word realistic. It understands only feeling. It understands only the tone of conviction. And so, because Thomas slept each night in the mood of "I never get ahead," the world, being faithful, continued to present him with a life in which he never got ahead. Not because money was cruel, not because employers were wicked, not because the economy was his master, but because his inner conversation was his master. And it went further than money. Because the man who speaks inwardly as one defeated will meet defeat in many forms. He will meet it as missed opportunities. He will meet it as delays. He will meet it as people who do not take him seriously. He will meet it as plans that collapse at the last moment. And he will call it life, never realizing it is simply the echo of his own inner voice. Do you see the tragedy? And do you see the power? Because if that is true, and it is, then your entire world is not a prison. It is a mirror. And a mirror is not your enemy. It is your informant. It shows you what you have been consenting to within. Now Thomas did not know he was doing it. Most do not. They think the cause of their life is outside. They think it is people. They think it is conditions. They think it is the past. They think it is their age, their education, their luck. But I tell you, the cause is always closer than your breath. The cause is the state from which you are speaking inwardly. This is why two people can live in the same city, under the same sky, with the same opportunities around them, and yet live in entirely different worlds. One walks through life as though life is against him, and life proves him right. Another walks through life as though life is for him, and life proves her right. The difference is not the outer world. The difference is the conversation they keep in secret. Now, I am not saying this to blame you. I am saying it to free you. Because if you discover that your inner conversation has been creating your experience, then you must also accept the glorious truth that you can create something new by changing that inner conversation, not by fighting the world, not by pleading with conditions, but by changing the speaker within, changing the state from which you speak, until the new inner conversation feels natural and therefore must become visible. So in the next part, I will show you how to identify the old voice without fear, how to interrupt it without struggle, and how to construct a new inner conversation that is not forced, not mechanical, but alive. So alive that you will begin to feel, even before the evidence appears, that something has shifted. And once it shifts within, it cannot remain hidden. Now, having seen that your world is the echo of your inner conversation, we must go one step deeper, because there is a reason people can repeat beautiful words for years and see little change. They speak, yes, but they speak from the wrong place. And this is the heart of what I call the law of state. The state is not merely a mood, it is not merely a passing emotion. A state is a dwelling place in consciousness. It is the position you occupy inwardly, the seat from which you view yourself, life, and the world. And here is the great secret that frees you from endless striving. You do not speak to yourself to get. You speak to yourself from being. Let me say that again, slowly, because if it enters you, it will change everything. You do not speak inwardly in order to persuade reality to give you something. You speak inwardly as one who already is what you desired to be, and then reality must rearrange itself to match your being. This is why I warn you against begging, even inwardly. This is why I tell you that prayers that come from need keep you in need, because the state of need is the thing that speaks. And whatever speaks within you with authority becomes your world. So I will give you a sentence that I want you to carry like a lamp in your hand, because it will light up your inner life and show you exactly where you have been creating from. You do not get what you say. You get what you are saying from. Again, you do not get what you say. You get what you are saying from. Now, what does this mean in living terms? It means a poor man may say, I am wealthy, and yet speak from the state of poverty. He speaks as one who is trying to become. He speaks with strain. He speaks with desperation. He speaks with a secret disbelief, and that secret tone is what the subconscious hears. But a wealthy man, whether he has visible money yet or not, speaks from a different place. He does not speak as one trying to convince himself. He speaks as one describing what is already true in his own mind. His words carry the feeling of naturalness. You see, the subconscious mind is not impressed by your vocabulary. It is impressed by your state. It is moved by the feeling that accompanies your inner speech. It is persuaded only by what feels like reality to you. This is why two people can say the same words and get opposite results. One speaks from fear, and fear is planted. Another speaks from fulfillment, and fulfillment is planted. Now, when I speak of living from the end, what the world has come to call living in the end, I do not mean that you pretend outwardly. I do not mean that you put on a performance for your neighbors. I do not mean that you boast or exaggerate or shout declarations into the air. I mean something far more quiet, far more intimate, and far more powerful. I mean that inwardly, in the secret chamber of yourself, you move into the state that would be yours if your desire were already fulfilled. And you allow your inner conversation to come from that state as naturally as breathing. For example, consider the state of wealth. A woman may sit at her table with bills before her, and the world would say, this is reality. The senses say, see, here are the facts. The old state whispers, this is who you are, struggling, limited, always catching up. But if she understands the law, she does not argue with the bills. She does not deny that they are on the table. She simply refuses to let them name her. Instead, she moves inwardly into another state. She takes the feeling that would be hers if she were already abundantly supplied, relief, ease, quiet confidence, and she occupies it as the present truth of her being. And from that state, her inner conversation changes, not as an effort, not as a strain, but as a consequence. She begins to think thoughts that a wealthy woman thinks. She begins to speak inwardly the way a woman speaks who is already free. She hears herself saying, quietly, everything is taken care of. I am always provided for. I have more than enough. And if that were all, mere words, it would be nothing. But it is not mere words. It is a state speaking. The wealthy state has a tone. It has an atmosphere. It has a fragrance, like perfume in a room. The poor state also has a tone, tightness, worry, urgency, humiliation, fear. And whichever atmosphere you wear inwardly becomes your world outwardly in time. Now consider the state of health. A man may wake in the morning and feel pain. The senses declare you are unwell. The memory of past illness rises like a witness in court. The old state says, this is your portion. This is your body. This is your fate. And then the man speaks inwardly from that state. I am sick. I am weak. I am getting worse. He may not even speak those exact words, but he feels them. And that feeling is the speech of the state. But another man, one who knows the law, does something different. He does not fight the body with fear. He does not make the pain his identity. He moves inwardly into the state of health. And from that state, he begins to speak. He hears himself saying, I am strong. I am renewed. My body is obedient to my assumption. I am whole. At first, yes, it may feel strange, because you are leaving an old home and entering a new one. But the question is not whether it feels familiar at first. The question is whether you are willing to remain in the new state until it becomes familiar. Because every state becomes natural through occupancy. And here is a truth that will help you. The world you call real is simply the state you have made natural. If poverty feels natural to you, it is not because it is true. It is because it is familiar. If loneliness feels natural to you, it is not because it is destiny. It is because it is rehearsed. If struggle feels like life, it is because you have lived in that state so long that it feels like yourself. But the moment you begin to live inwardly from another state, you are creating a new normal. Now consider the state of being loved. This is one of the most painful states for people to change, because loneliness can feel like a fact carved in stone. A woman may say, "No one ever stays. I am always forgotten. I am always the one who gives and receives little." And then she carries that state into every room. She carries it into every conversation. She carries it even when she smiles. It lives behind her eyes, and the world responds to it. But if she learns the law, she discovers something almost shocking. She discovers that love is not begged for. Love is not chased. Love is not forced from another. Love is a state. And when she occupies it inwardly, the world must echo it. So she begins to live as one who is cherished. She hears the inner conversation of the loved woman. She hears herself saying, "I am chosen, I am adored, I am secure, I am treasured." And she does not say it like a poor creature trying to steal affection from the world. She says it like one who has discovered her own worth as a fact within. Now here is where most stumble, and I want you to see it clearly. They try to change their inner conversation while remaining in the same state. They remain in the state of poverty and try to speak wealth. They remain in the state of sickness and try to speak health. They remain in the state of abandonment and try to speak love. So their words feel like a lie, because the speaker is unchanged. You cannot speak like a king while sitting inwardly on the floor as a beggar. So the first task is not to find the perfect sentence. The first task is to change the inner position, the place from which you speak. When the state changes, the speech changes naturally, and naturalness is the sign. If your inner words feel forced, you are still outside the state. If your inner words feel like you are trying to convince yourself, you are still outside the state. If your inner words feel strained, like you are pushing a heavy stone uphill, you are still outside the state. But when you have entered the state, something wonderful happens. The words arise by themselves. The feeling carries them. The speech becomes effortless, like telling the truth. And that is why I say the secret is not effort. The secret is occupancy. You occupy the end, and then you speak from it. Now I am planting a seed here that I will develop later, because it is one of the most misunderstood things in all my teaching. The seed is this: feeling is the secret, but do not misunderstand me. Feeling is not emotion whipped up like a storm. Feeling is not theatrical excitement. Feeling is not forcing yourself to be happy. Feeling is the inner knowing, the inward acceptance, the sense of reality. It is that quiet, settled conviction that says, "This is so," even before the senses agree. And the subconscious mind responds to that quiet conviction as surely as the earth responds to a planted seed. So when you speak inwardly from the end, what you are really doing is accepting a state as present fact. You are wearing it, you are living in it, you are making it home. And once it is home, the world must reflect it. That is the law of state. So now, in the next part, I will show you how to move into a state deliberately, how to recognize when you have truly entered it, and how to sustain it without strain for 3 days, until what was once untrue becomes natural, and what is natural must harden into fact. Now we come to the point that causes many to either prove this law or abandon it, just as it is about to bear fruit. For I have said to you that 3 days of disciplined inner conversation can begin to transform your world. And some of you, being honest, feel a resistance rise the moment you hear that. You say inwardly, 3 days. How can that be? My problems have been here for years. My habits have been here for decades. My circumstances look fixed. Surely 3 days cannot undo what time has built. And I tell you gently, time did not build it. Consciousness built it. And what consciousness has built, consciousness can rebuild. Now I did not choose the period of 3 days, because it sounds dramatic. I chose it because Scripture reveals it, and experience confirms it. Scripture speaks in symbols, and the symbols are not accidental. They are not poetry for comfort. They are psychological truths written in the language of vision. Jonah, in the belly of the whale for 3 days, is not an account of a man swallowed by a creature of the sea. It is the story of a man swallowed by a state, hidden, enclosed, cut off from appearances, while a new identity is forming within him. Christ in the tomb for 3 days is not merely an event to be admired. It is the eternal drama of every assumption that is accepted and incubated until it rises as an outward fact. The 3 days represent what I call the gestation of consciousness. Just as the seed, once planted, does not leap instantly into full harvest, so an assumption, once accepted, does not always show itself instantly to the senses. It must be carried in the womb of your being until it reaches the point of naturalness, and then it is born into your world. Now listen closely, because this will save you from one of the greatest traps: impatience. Most people want immediate evidence. They want the mirror to change first. They want the outer world to applaud their inner work. But the mirror does not lead. The mirror follows. And therefore there is a period, often brief, sometimes longer, depending on resistance, where you must remain faithful without needing proof. 3 days is not waiting. 3 days is not delay. 3 days is the sacred interval in which the new state becomes rooted. So let me show you what happens across these 3 days, not as a theory, but as a living pattern you can recognize. On the first day, you plant, you take the new inner conversation, the speech of the desired state, and you begin to give it life. You begin to speak from the end. You begin to occupy the feeling of already being the one you wish to be. At first, it may feel unusual, because you have lived so long in another state that the old speech feels familiar, even if it brings you pain. But you persist. You rise in the morning, and you do not begin the day as the old self. You begin as the new. You speak inwardly as the one who has already received. You move through the day as best you can from that same tone, and you fall asleep in the mood of the wish fulfilled. On this first day, you may feel a strange mixture. A part of you feels hope, quiet, steady hope, because you are touching something real. And another part of you feels skepticism, because the senses are trained to worship what they see. You may find yourself listening for the old voice. You may even catch it quickly. And that is good. Do not be frightened by this. It is not failure. It is awareness, awakening, because you cannot change what you do not notice. So on the first day, you plant, and you begin to become aware. You begin to realize how often you have been speaking yourself into prison without knowing it. Now the second day is the most difficult. And I say that without exaggeration. The second day is what I call the day of death. It is the day when the old state fights for its life. You see, your former state is not an idea. It is a habit of being. It is a home you have lived in. It is an identity you have worn until it feels like you. And when you attempt to leave it, it does not simply wave goodbye. It tempts you back. It sends you old thoughts with greater intensity. It brings up memories. It shows you evidence. It whispers, be reasonable. It says, look, nothing has changed. You are only fooling yourself. And here is the great danger. On the second day, many people interpret this resistance as proof that the new assumption is false. But in truth, the resistance is often proof that the old assumption is dying. Consider the seed in the earth. The seed does not become the plant without breaking. The shell must rupture. Something must dissolve. The old form must give way. And to the untrained eye, that looks like nothing is happening. But beneath the soil, everything is happening. So on the second day, you may feel uncomfortable, not always in your body, but in your mind. The old conversations may return like a chorus. The old fears may knock at the door more loudly than usual. And this is where you must be very gentle and very firm. Do not fight the old voice with anger. Do not condemn yourself. Do not say, I have failed. Simply recognize what is occurring. The old man is pleading for attention. The old state is asking to be fed. And if you feed it, if you return to that inner conversation, you resurrect it. But if you refuse, if you remain loyal to the new speech, the old state withers from lack of attention, and the new one grows strong. This is why I tell you that your inner conversation must be guarded as though your life depends on it. Because in a very real sense, it does. Not your life in the physical sense of breath and heartbeat, but your life in the sense of what you will live as. For you are always choosing a life by choosing a state, and the second day is the great test of loyalty. It asks you one question: will you bow to what you see, or will you remain faithful to what you have accepted within? Now, if you pass that second day, if you do not return to the old inner speech, something changes on the third day that is almost quiet, almost subtle, and yet unmistakable. On the third day, the new state begins to feel natural, and naturalness is everything, because the subconscious mind accepts as true what feels natural. It does not argue. It does not debate. It does not ask for proof. It accepts the tone of reality. So when the new conversation, your new inner speech, begins to feel like this is simply who I am, you have entered the Sabbath. And what is the Sabbath? It is not a day of the week. It is the state of rest. It is the cessation of struggle. It is the inward knowing that the work is done. On the third day, you may notice that you are no longer trying so hard to keep the new speech alive. It begins to speak itself. The new identity begins to breathe through you, and the outer world, though it may not yet fully reflect it, begins to show little signs, little movements, little shifts that are not accidents. A conversation happens that seems too timely. A door opens that had been shut. A person calls you who had forgotten you. A chance encounter takes place that sets something in motion. And if you are not careful, you will dismiss these as coincidences. But you must understand, there are no coincidences in a world that is consciousness externalized. These are the first ripples of the new state touching the surface of your world. Now I must be very clear, because I do not want you to misunderstand the 3 days. 3 days is not a superstition. It is not a ritual. It is not a magical number that guarantees something if you merely count it. 3 days is a measure of faithfulness. It is a measure of sustained occupancy. When you remain in a state long enough for it to become natural, you have impregnated the subconscious mind with that new identity. And once impregnated, it must express it. That is the gestation of consciousness. So do not treat these 3 days casually. Do not do it half-heartedly. Do not do it when you remember. Do not do it only when you feel inspired. Because the law does not respond to inspiration. The law responds to assumption. Now let me help you with the one thing that ruins the second day for most people. They wake up and they look for evidence. They check the mirror, as it were, and they say, has it changed yet? And because it has not changed fully, because it cannot change before the face changes, they conclude the work has failed. Then they speak inwardly as the old self again. They say, it didn't work. They say, I knew it was too good to be true. They say, this is my life. And that sentence is not an opinion. It is a command. So I say to you during these 3 days, do not seek evidence. Seek naturalness. Do not ask, has it happened yet? Ask, am I speaking from the end? Do not ask, is it working? Ask, from which state am I talking to myself right now? Because your only work is inner fidelity. The bridge of incidents, that chain of events that leads you to the fulfillment, is not built by your anxious inspection. It is built by the subconscious once the assumption is accepted. Your task is to remain loyal long enough for the new state to become home. And home is not proved by argument. Home is proved by rest. So if you will give yourself these 3 days, not as a trial, but as a sacred act, you will discover something that will astonish you. You will discover that the world you feared was fixed is fluid, that the life you accepted as fate is only habit, that the circumstances you called reality were only echoes. and you will begin to understand why Scripture speaks again and again of the third day. Because the third day is the day of completion. The seed is planted. The old shell is broken. The new life rises. And this is not an event in history. It is the pattern of your own consciousness. Now in the next part, I will take this law and apply it directly, very personally, to the great symbol in our title. Not to tempt you with fantasy, but to show you the extreme case that proves the rule, that if consciousness is truly the only cause, then even what men call chance must bow. And I will show you exactly how to structure your inner speech, so that for 3 days you are not merely repeating phrases, but actually living as the one who has already received. Now, my dear friends, we come to what many of you have been waiting for, the part that makes the mind sit up, the part that provokes resistance, the part that seems almost too bold to speak aloud, the lottery. And before I say another word, I must be absolutely clear, so you do not misunderstand me and turn this into a superstition, a craving, or a chase. I do not stand here to promote gambling. I do not teach you to run after chance, like a beggar chasing a coin that might fall from a stranger's pocket. I am not interested in the fever of the crowd, nor the restless hope that rises and falls with numbers printed on paper. I am interested in something far greater. I use the lottery as an extreme symbol because it appears to the human mind to be the very kingdom of chance. It appears to be the one place where effort cannot guarantee reward, where labor cannot force a result, where education cannot assure victory, where influence cannot purchase certainty. And because it appears that way, it becomes the perfect mirror to reveal the truth. For if consciousness truly is the only reality, then even what the world calls chance must bow to the state you occupy. Now do not misunderstand me. When I speak of the lottery, I am not saying you must fix your mind on a slip of paper. I am not saying you must become obsessed with a draw. I am not saying you must make your life revolve around a scheme. No, I am saying this: if you can prove the law in the realm that seems most random, you will never doubt the law again in any realm. For once you see that the so-called unpredictable world is still the shadow of consciousness, you will stop calling life uncertain, and you will begin to live as the operant power. So let us take it as a parable, a living illustration. Let us imagine, not as fantasy, but as a test of principle, what it would mean to speak to yourself correctly for 3 days, and then watch life move with such precision that what men call impossible becomes inevitable. Suppose I spoke to myself like this. Suppose, for 3 days, I refused to speak inwardly as a man hoping for luck. For that is the great mistake. The man who hopes for luck is confessing, without realizing it, that he is not already favored. He is saying inwardly, perhaps, maybe, if, I wonder, and the subconscious hears uncertainty and produces uncertainty. But suppose I did the opposite. Suppose I became inwardly the man who had already received, not arrogantly, not boastfully, not as a performance, but quietly, naturally, as a state. Suppose, on the first morning before I opened my eyes, I allowed the first words within me to be the words of the fulfilled one. Not, will it happen? Not, what are the odds? Not, I hope this works. But simply, with a calmness that belongs to possession, it is done. And I let that sentence carry its own weight. Then, as I rose and moved through my day, I did not argue with the world I saw, because I would understand the world I saw was only yesterday's inner speech made visible. If the outer world showed me nothing, so what? A mirror does not change first. I would keep the inner conversation alive, not like a man trying to convince himself, but like a man remembering what is already true. And when the old state attempted to speak, when it whispered, be reasonable, when it said, this is foolish, when it brought up the evidence of lack, I would not wrestle with it. I would simply replace it. I would revise it at once. For a man is not changed by fighting a thought. A man is changed by refusing to feed a state. So if the old voice said, you never get the break, I would answer inwardly, I am always chosen. If the old voice said, "That doesn't happen to people like you," I would answer, "It happens to me naturally." If the old voice said, "This is impossible," I would answer, "All things are possible to God, and God is my own wonderful human imagination." And in saying this, I would not be reciting a doctrine. I would be shifting identity. Now let me take the lottery out of the realm of numbers for a moment and put it where it truly belongs, in the realm of self-concept. Because the lottery in this teaching is never about a ticket. It is about this. Who are you inwardly? Are you the one who is overlooked? Are you the one who is always nearly there but never quite? Are you the one who lives by struggle and strain? Are you the one who feels life is against you? Or are you the one who is favored? And I do not mean favored by a distant deity who hands out blessings like prizes at a fair. I mean favored by your own state. For the state you occupy is the power that selects the events you will call chance. Men say he was lucky, but what they call luck is simply the unseen arrangement of consciousness. They call it coincidence because they do not see the cause. But if you know the law, you know there is no coincidence. There is only the outpicturing of an assumption. So suppose I became, for 3 days, the man who was already the winner. Now listen carefully, because here is where most people ruin it without realizing. They try to imagine winning, but they imagine it like a poor man imagines wealth, at a distance. They watch a scene like a spectator. They picture it as something that might happen to them someday. They keep it outside themselves. But that is not living from the end. Living from the end is not seeing yourself winning. Living from the end is being the one who has won. It is the difference between staring at a feast through a window and sitting at the table, eating. So suppose, in the quiet of my own mind, I entered the state of the fulfilled desire. Not the state of trying, not the state of hoping, but the state of possession. What would I feel if it were true? Not excitement whipped up like a storm, but the deeper feeling, the feeling that always comes after the excitement passes. Relief, freedom, a quiet ease, the sense that life is now spacious. So I would let that be my inner atmosphere. And from that atmosphere, I would speak to myself all day long, not endlessly, not mechanically, but consistently. The rich man does not chant, "I am rich," like a spell. He simply thinks and speaks from the awareness that he is supplied. The loved woman does not beg herself to feel cherished. She moves through life as one who is cherished. So for 3 days, I would adopt the inner posture of being already chosen, already favored, already the one upon whom fortune has fallen, not as a surprise, but as the natural reflection of my state. And then something curious happens, something that many miss. As the state becomes natural, you stop asking, "Will it happen?" Because the question only belongs to the one who is outside the state. When you are inside the state, you do not question whether you will receive what you already possess. You simply live. And as you live, the world begins to rearrange. Now the mind will object here. It will say, "But Neville, how could inner speech affect something like a lottery?" And I answer, you are still clinging to the idea that life is divided. Some parts inside your control and some parts outside it. But if consciousness is the only reality, then there is no realm outside of it. You may not see the chain of causes, but causes are always present. When a man wins, and the crowd calls it chance, they are simply admitting ignorance of the law. They do not know the state that preceded the event. They do not know the inner assumptions that were entertained. They do not know the invisible bridge of incidents that led the man to the moment. But the bridge existed. It always exists. And when you begin to live from a new state, you do not need to design the bridge. You do not need to calculate the how. You do not need to dictate the means. Your only work is to remain faithful to the end. Now let me make this even plainer, because I do not want anyone listening to misunderstand and turn this into a mere obsession with numbers. The outer form is never the prize. If a man needs $1 million, life may bring it by a ticket, by an inheritance, by an opportunity, by a partnership, by a sudden opening he could not have planned. The channel is not your concern. The state is your concern. If you insist on one channel, you may blind yourself to the fulfillment that is already coming by another door. So when I say won the lottery, understand what I am truly saying. I am saying I entered the state of being already supplied in a way so complete that the world had to mirror it in some dramatic form. And now we arrive at the sentence I want you to remember, because it contains the true meaning of the whole matter. Money did not come to me, a new man appeared. That is the secret. When you change your inner conversation, you do not merely attract money. You become someone to whom money comes naturally. You become someone for whom opportunities are normal. You become someone who is not shocked by abundance, because abundance is no longer foreign. And when that happens, the world must answer you accordingly. So if you hear the title, and your mind says, this is about money, I tell you it is not. It is about identity. It is about the man you are when no one is watching. It is about the conversation you keep in secret. Because the lottery, wealth, great sums, sudden provision, these are only the shadows cast by a state. And when the state changes, the shadows must change. Now, in the next part, I will show you how to conduct the inner conversation through the ordinary hours of the day, how to handle contradiction without strain, how to revise instantly when the old voice speaks, how to make the new speech feel natural so that 3 days becomes not a struggle, but a quiet, royal occupation of the end. Now, my dear friends, let us bring this out of the clouds and into the ordinary hours of your day. For the law is not proved in the lecture hall. It is proved in your kitchen, on your street, in your office, in the quiet moments when no one sees you, and therefore the state you occupy is honest. And if you will learn to govern your inner conversation during the day, you will stop living at the mercy of moods and circumstances, and you will begin to live as the operant power. I will not give you a rigid system. I will not burden you with complicated rules. This is not a mechanical practice. It is a change of identity. And identity must be lived, not performed. So I will simply show you the rhythm of it, the natural flow, morning, day, night, because your day is a circle, and your inner word is the thread that runs through it. First, the morning. If you wish to change your life in 3 days, the morning is not a small thing. It is not a casual beginning. It is a threshold. For what you do in the first moments of waking sets the tone of your state. Most people awaken and immediately accept the old world again. They open their eyes, and the senses rush in like an army. The same room, the same worries, the same habits, the same story. And then the old inner conversation begins without being invited. It's another day. Nothing changes. I'm already behind. I have too much to handle. And with those few sentences, spoken silently, they have already resumed the old state before their feet even touch the floor. So if you are serious, if you truly mean to test this law, then on these 3 days you must treat the first moment of waking as sacred. Before you open your eyes fully, before you move, before you let the world name you, you name yourself, not with strain, not with effort, but with a gentle certainty. You simply begin the day from the end. You let the first inner words be the words of the fulfilled one. If your desire is wealth, you do not begin the day as one anxious about money. You begin it as one who is already supplied. If your desire is health, you do not begin the day by checking the body for evidence. You begin it as one who is already whole. If your desire is love, you do not begin the day as one waiting for a message. You begin it as one who is already cherished. Now listen closely, because this is the essence of the whole practice. You do not begin the day by asking, will it happen? You begin the day by quietly affirming, it is already so. And you do not say it like a man reciting a sentence. You say it like a man remembering a fact. That is the morning, then comes the day. Now here is where most people lose what they planted. They can be moved in a moment of hearing. They can feel inspired. They can even begin their day well. But then something happens. Something small. Sometimes nothing more than a look from another person. a bill on the table, a delay, a memory, and they react. And their reaction reveals the state they truly occupy. They say, "This proves it isn't working." They say, "This always happens to me." They say, "Of course, why would it be different?" And with that single reaction, they have returned to the old dwelling place. So during these 3 days, the day becomes your training ground, not for strain, but for awareness. Every contradiction that appears in the outer world is an opportunity to prove your loyalty to the inner world. For do not forget, the outer world is delayed. It is the harvest of yesterday's states. It cannot show you the new seed immediately. So when you see contradiction, you must remember what it is. It is not a verdict. It is not the truth. It is an echo. And you do not obey echoes. You obey the voice. Now, what does this look like in practice? It looks like this. You go about your day, and whenever you catch yourself beginning to speak inwardly from the old state, you do not punish yourself. You do not say, "I am terrible at this." You do not condemn yourself. You do not fall into discouragement. Because discouragement is simply the old state trying to survive. Instead, you correct gently. You revise immediately. And revision is not some grand ceremony. It is simply replacing the inner sentence you do not want with the inner sentence that belongs to the new state. If you catch yourself saying inwardly, "I can't afford that," you do not linger in it. You do not argue. You do not build a whole story around it. You replace it. You say inwardly, calmly, "I am always provided for. Everything is taken care of." If you catch yourself saying, "This never works for me," you replace it at once with, "Everything is working perfectly. The law is unfolding now." If you catch yourself saying, "I've ruined it with doubt," you replace it immediately with, "Nothing is lost. My assumption is intact. My end is secure." This is the discipline. But it is not a harsh discipline. It is the discipline of love. It is like guiding a child. You do not beat the child because he stumbles. You take his hand and set him back on the path. So you guide your mind back to the end, again and again. Not with strain, but with fidelity. Now, a word about feelings during the day. Many people believe they must feel constant joy to prove they are in the right state. That is not true. You are not required to be emotionally excited. In fact, excitement often belongs to the state of wanting, not having. What you are seeking is not excitement. What you are seeking is naturalness. Naturalness has a quiet tone. It feels like ease. It feels like acceptance. It feels like this is simply true. It feels like rest. So if you are not dancing with joy, do not think you have failed. If you are calm, steady, and inwardly faithful, you are doing it correctly. And the greatest proof that you are in the right state is not that you feel emotional fireworks. The greatest proof is that your inner conversation has changed, because the inner conversation is the voice of the state. Now then comes the night, and here we touch the most powerful part of the day, because the night is not merely rest, it is the entrance into the subconscious, the womb of creation. The last inner conversation you have before you fall asleep is not lost. It does not vanish. It continues to echo quietly through the depths of you while you sleep. So I say to you, if you will keep the new conversation all day and then go to sleep in the old one, you undo much of your work, because the subconscious receives most deeply in the drowsy state. So during these 3 days, you must treat the final moments before sleep as you would treat the sealing of a letter. You are sealing an impression. Most people seal fear. They seal worry. They seal lack. They seal regret. They lie in bed and rehearse the day's failures. They replay conversations. They imagine tomorrow going badly. They count their problems. And then they wake up and say, "Why is my life so heavy?" My dear friends, they planted heaviness and they harvested it. So tonight, and for these 3 days, you will do something different. You will not take the day's burdens into sleep. You will take the end into sleep. You will take the new state into sleep. You will let your last inner conversation be the conversation of fulfillment. Not "I hope," Not maybe, not please, but it is done. Now I must say something that will free many of you from unnecessary fear. You will not do this perfectly, and you do not need to. You are not asked to be flawless. You are asked to be faithful. If you slip during the day, do not panic. Revise. If you fall into an old mood, do not condemn yourself. Return. It is not the occasional stray thought that ruins the work. It is the sustained return to the old state that keeps you in the old results. So you correct gently, and you persist. And as you persist, the new inner conversation becomes easier. It begins to feel like home. And when it feels like home, you have reached the Sabbath, and the world must respond. Now let me repeat, elegantly, the message at the center of all this, because repetition is not redundancy when it sinks into the heart. Your inner conversation is your consciousness externalized. You do not get what you say. You get what you are saying from. And if you will, for 3 days, speak from the end in the morning, correct in the day, and seal the end at night, you will prove the law, not as a hope, but as experience. Now in the next part, I will take you into the night more deeply. I will show you how sleep becomes the altar of creation, how the final words and feelings impress the subconscious, and how to make your inner speech so natural as you drift into sleep that it is carried into the depths and there becomes fact. Now we enter the most sacred interval of the day, not sacred because men have built temples around it, or because it is dressed in ceremony, but sacred because it is the quiet doorway through which impressions pass into the deep. Sleep. Most men and women think of sleep as the end of the day, the shutting down of the mind, a simple rest of the body, and they give no thought to what they carry with them into that stillness. They fall into sleep as they fall into a chair, carelessly, without awareness, never realizing that they are entering the workshop of creation. But I tell you, the moments before sleep are not ordinary moments. They are the soft borderland where the senses begin to loosen their grip, where the world of facts fades and the inner world grows vivid. And in that borderland, what you feel as true sinks most easily into the subconscious mind. So if you would change your life, do not treat the last minutes of your day lightly, for the last inner dialogue, those final silent sentences you speak to yourself, does not die when your eyes close. It does not vanish into the dark. It continues. It echoes. It is carried like a seed into the depths, and the subconscious receives it without argument. This is why you must understand something very simple, and yet so few ever do. Your final conversation before sleep is the one you most often live from the next day. If you fall asleep feeling wronged, you will wake in the mood of being wronged. If you fall asleep fearing tomorrow, you will wake to meet fear. If you fall asleep rehearsing lack, you will rise into lack's atmosphere again. And then you will call it life, never realizing you prepared the day before you ever opened your eyes. So I say to you, sleep is an altar, and every night you place something upon it. The question is not whether you are doing it. The question is what you are offering. Now there is a simple way to use this altar wisely, and I have called it, in its gentlest form, the lullaby method. It is not complicated. It is not dramatic. It is not a performance. It is simply a quiet inner song. A short phrase that implies your wish is already fulfilled, repeated softly as you drift into sleep. But I warn you, it is not the phrase that does the work. It is never the phrase. It is the feeling that the phrase awakens in you. Men love formulas. They love to ask, what words must I say? As though a certain arrangement of syllables is a charm that forces life to obey. But life is not moved by syllables. The subconscious is not impressed by clever sentences. The subconscious is impressed by reality. And reality, to the subconscious, is what you feel to be true. So when I speak of a lullaby, I mean a phrase you can repeat with ease, a phrase that carries you into the mood of the wish fulfilled. The phrase is only the vehicle. The destination is the state. And if you reach the state, the vehicle has done its work. Now I want you to feel the gentleness of this, because many try to force themselves at night. They lie down and strain. They repeat words with clenched teeth. They try to whip up emotion like a storm. And the very effort reveals they are still outside the end. They are still trying to get. But the law is not served by strain. The law is served by acceptance. So I want you to approach the night as you would approach a warm room after a long walk in the cold. You do not force warmth. You enter it. You let it surround you, you let it soften you, you let it become your atmosphere. That is how you enter the state before sleep. You lie down and you begin to let go of the day. Not by wrestling with it, but by releasing it. You loosen the body, you let the breath grow quiet. You allow the mind to become simple. And then, gently, you introduce a single truth, not as a hope, not as a wish, as a present fact. If your desire is abundance, the phrase might be something like, "Isn't it wonderful?" or "Thank you," or "Everything is taken care of." But again, do not become entangled in the words. The words are only valuable if they awaken the feeling, so you repeat them softly as you drift. And you notice, does the body respond? Does the chest soften? Does relief appear, even slightly? Does the mind relax as though the burden were lifted? That is the sign you are entering the right state, because the fulfilled state always has one unmistakable quality. It feels like relief. The anxious man lives in tension. The fulfilled man lives in ease. The one who is still waiting cannot rest. The one who has received can rest. So if your phrase is leading you into rest, it is doing its work. Now you may ask, "Neville, what if I do not feel it strongly? What if it is faint?" My dear friends, do not despise the faint beginning. A candle does not begin as the sun, yet it gives light. You are not trying to force yourself into excitement. You are simply allowing yourself to accept what you have chosen as true. Even a small acceptance, if it is real, is powerful. The subconscious does not require drama. It requires conviction. And conviction is often quiet. So repeat your lullaby gently, not to convince God, not to persuade life, not to beg the universe. No, you repeat it to occupy a state, and if you persist, the state will take you, and you will fall asleep in it. And that is the greatest victory. For if you fall asleep in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, you have carried the seed into the womb, and the womb does not forget. Now I want you to hear this next part very slowly, because it may remove a great fear from many of you. You do not have to finish anything at night. You do not have to complete a scene. You do not have to say 100 repetitions. You do not have to stay awake to prove your discipline. In fact, if you fall asleep while repeating your phrase, while feeling the end, you have succeeded. Because the moment of slipping into sleep is the moment the impression is most easily received. So do not worry about time. Do not watch the clock. Do not measure your success by how long you stayed awake. Measure it by the tone you carried into sleep. Did you enter sleep in worry or in relief? Did you enter sleep in lack or in fullness? Did you enter sleep in longing or in possession? That is the measure. Now I will tell you something I have observed again and again. If you are faithful in these 3 days, morning, day, and night, then the night becomes your ally in a way you cannot yet imagine. You begin to wake with a different mood. You begin to rise with a quieter confidence. You begin to feel the new self more present than the old. And when that happens, it becomes easier to maintain the inner conversation during the day, because the subconscious has been saturated at night. This is why I call sleep an altar. Because on an altar, you do not place what you fear. You place what you worship. You place what you choose as holy. So tonight, if you would test this law, place the end on the altar. Place the feeling of being already free, already loved, already supplied, already chosen, and let your lullaby be the gentle song that carries you there. Now in the next part, I will show you how this becomes precise, how the law responds with mathematical fidelity to the state you occupy, how faith is not strain but rest, and how you can remain inwardly loyal even when appearances speak loudly, so that what you have accepted as true must harden into fact. Now, my dear friends, I want to remove from your mind the last refuge of doubt, the idea that this law is uncertain, that it works for some and not for others, that perhaps you are an exception, or that perhaps it depends on mood, chance, or some mysterious favor. No, this law is not whimsical. It is as exact as mathematics. It is as faithful as gravity. When a man releases an object from his hand, he does not wonder whether gravity will work today. He does not say, perhaps it will fall, perhaps it will rise, perhaps I am the one person for whom the law does not apply. He knows. And he knows because gravity is not personal. It does not choose. It does not debate. It responds with perfect consistency to a cause. In the same way, the law of consciousness is not personal. It does not judge whether you are worthy. It does not ask whether your desire is noble or foolish. It does not consult the opinions of men. It does not look at your past. It responds only to one thing: your assumption. And this is the sentence I want you to carry like a sword in your hand, because it cuts through uncertainty and ends all begging. The law does not respond to hope. It responds to assumption. Again, the law does not respond to hope. It responds to assumption. Hope is a beautiful thing in the world of men, but hope is weak in the world of law. Hope says, I want it, but I am not sure. Hope says, perhaps it will happen. Hope says, someday. And hope, though it may comfort, still places you outside the end. Assumption is different. Assumption says, it is already so. Assumption says, this is my state. Assumption speaks in the present tense of being. And because consciousness is the only cause, the state you assume must externalize. Now listen, because here is why so many remain trapped, even after hearing these truths. They try to serve two states. They want to be wealthy, yet they continue to speak inwardly as the poor man. They want to be loved, yet they continue to rehearse rejection. They want health, yet they continue to inhabit the mood of illness. They dip into the new state for a few minutes, and then return to the old for hours. And then they wonder why their world does not change. My dear friends, the law cannot be mocked. You cannot plant wheat and expect roses. You cannot assume lack and harvest abundance. You cannot live in the state of not yet and experience already. The law is precise. And this is why I say, during these 3 days, you must choose your master. You cannot serve two states. You cannot say inwardly, it is done, and then spend the day saying, it will never happen. You cannot go to sleep in relief and wake in fear and call it faith. Faith is not a burst of inspiration. Faith is not an emotional peak. Faith is loyalty. Faith is remaining in the state you have chosen, even when the senses try to pull you back into the old. And do you know what faith feels like when it is true? It feels like rest. It is not strain. It is not tension. It is not desperate repetition. It is the quiet knowing, I have accepted it. Therefore it must be. This is why Scripture says, be still and know. Not be frantic and hope. Not be anxious and plead. Be still. Stillness is the sign of possession. A man who is still hungry is restless. A man who has eaten can rest. So I tell you, if you are still asking, is it working? You are still outside the state. The state of fulfillment does not ask if it will be. It knows it is. Now I am not condemning you if the question rises. I am showing you the direction. Whenever you find yourself hoping, shift into assuming. Whenever you find yourself waiting, shift into living. Whenever you find yourself saying maybe, return to it is. Because the law responds to the dominant state. And here is where the precision becomes almost frightening, yet liberating. Your inner conversation is always selecting your experience. Every time you react, you are choosing a state. Every time you interpret an event, you are choosing a state. Every time you speak silently of yourself, you are choosing a state. And the law, like gravity, does not pause to ask whether you meant it. It simply externalizes. So if you desire to prove this, you must become very honest with yourself. Not harsh, not cruel, just honest. Ask yourself, throughout the day, from which state am I speaking right now? From which state am I reacting right now? From which state am I interpreting this moment? And when you see that you have slipped into the old, do not punish yourself. Simply return. Return immediately. For the law does not require perfection. It requires dominance. If the new state becomes dominant, it must appear. And dominance comes through consistency. This is why I emphasize 3 days. Not because the number itself is magic, but because 3 days of faithful assumption creates dominance. It creates a new normal. It creates a new naturalness. And when it becomes natural, the subconscious accepts it fully. Now let me speak plainly. If you will do this, if you will choose one end, and for 3 days live from it, speak from it, sleep from it, you will not need to wonder whether the law is real. You will know, because evidence will begin to appear. Not always in the dramatic form you expected, though sometimes it does, but in the quiet, inevitable rearrangement of events that only law can produce. People will begin to move. Circumstances will shift. Doors will open. The bridge of incidents will unfold, and it will happen with such naturalness that the untrained mind would call it coincidence. But you will know what you did. You will know that you changed the assumption, and because the law is absolute, the world had no choice but to mirror you. So let me repeat, slowly, deeply, so it sinks into your marrow. Your inner conversation is your consciousness externalized. You do not get what you say, you get what you are saying from. And the law does not respond to hope, it responds to assumption. Choose your assumption. Serve it. Remain faithful. And you will prove that life is not a game of chance, but a mirror of consciousness. Now, in the final part, I will gather everything we have spoken into a simple closing, not a list, but a living summary. And I will leave you with a quiet charge, a 3-day experiment. You can begin tonight, so that this is not merely something you heard, but something you lived. My dear wonderful friends, we have come to the end of this talk together, but what I have given you tonight is not meant to end here. It is meant to begin. For truth that remains only as words is not truth at all. It is only sound. But truth that is taken into the secret chamber of your own being and lived, quietly, faithfully, becomes power. So I will not leave you with a demand. I will not leave you with a modern call to action. I will leave you with the only action that matters, a decision. Because in the end, there are only 2 ways to live. You will either continue speaking inwardly, as you have always spoken, and you will continue living the life that inner speech creates, or you will begin, this very night, to speak from a new state, and you will watch your world, in time, rearrange itself to match you. No one can do this for you. Not a teacher, not a friend, not a book, not a ritual. The world can give you advice, but only you can choose the voice that speaks within you. So I ask you gently but firmly, what will you do with the next 3 days? Will you give them to the old conversation, the old inner murmuring of doubt, of lack, of waiting, the quiet sentences that have repeated so long they feel like truth? Or will you give these 3 days to the new man, the new woman, the one who is already supplied, already chosen, already loved, already free? Tonight, when you lay your head upon the pillow, do not carry the day's burdens into the altar of sleep. Do not rehearse your worries. Do not count your problems. Do not argue with the mirror. Instead, choose one simple end, one, and enter it. Speak inwardly as though it were already so. Feel it as natural. Let your final inner conversation be the conversation of fulfillment, and then fall asleep in that mood. Tomorrow when you rise, do not begin as the old self. Begin as the one who has already received. And if during the day you catch the old voice returning, do not fear it. Do not scold yourself. Simply revise. Simply return. Again and again. Gently and firmly. Until the new inner conversation becomes your home. And if you will do this, if you will keep faith with your own assumption for 3 days, you will begin to see what you have never dared to believe. That life is not against you. That circumstances are not your master. That what you have called fate is only a state. And that the moment you change the speaker within, the world must change the scene without. Now I will seal this in you with a final sentence. I want you to hear it slowly, and I want you to remember it when the old world tries to claim you again. You are not here to beg life. You are here to command consciousness, and consciousness is moved by your inner word. So guard your inner conversation, not for a week, not for a year, for 3 days, and then watch what begins to happen. Not because you forced it, not because you chased it, but because you became the one who already had it. My dear friends, let this be your experiment. Let it be quiet. Let it be sincere. Let it be faithful. And in 3 days, you will not need to ask if the law is real. You will know. Good night.